Hello and welcome back to the Poultry Network Podcast. I'm Tom Woolman.
And my name's Tom Willings.
Hello, Tom.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Yeah, the sun has come out and my spirits have lifted accordingly.
I don't quite know what happened to my voice there. I got awfully excited about that we're recording yet again. It's all good fun. All good fun.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't be doing it unless it made you a little bit excited.
Yeah, we do enjoy it. We do enjoy it. Today we've got our first repeat guest, which is exciting in itself.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a little bit of we shall see how it goes. It's quite exciting because this is one of the first people that we had early on, isn't it? Or the first two people. It's not just one repeat guest; it's two repeat guests.
Absolutely. So, before Christmas, we recorded an episode covering the release of the RSPCA Assured's revised hatchery standards, which have just come into effect on the 16th of February. But in our coverage, there were a few issues that caused the RSPCA Assured to get in touch and seek an opportunity to come and explain a few things from their perspective. So we're delighted today that Kelly Grelier, the Chief Commercial Officer at RSPCA Assured, and Kate Parks, the Senior Scientific Officer at RSPCA, are here with us to discuss the standards in a bit more detail.
Okay. Well, let's start the interview, but first a message from our sponsor. The Poultry Network Podcast is brought to you by Poultry Network, the UK's digital resource for the poultry sector.
Alongside the podcast, we of course have our website and our New Look newsletter, delivering a weekly digest of news, market insight, technical features and industry analysis straight to your inbox, whatever part of the poultry sector you work in, whether you're a producer, an integrator, egg packer or a business within the supply chain across the UK.
If you're involved in poultry, it's completely free to read and subscribe. Visit Poultry Network, that's just poultry.network, in your browser and input your email. Once you have, make sure we are added to your contacts or safe sender list to ensure you never miss an episode.
And if you're a business supplying products or services to the sector, why not advertise where your customers already are?
To discuss podcast sponsorship, newsletter placements or digital campaigns, email jake@dmediagroup.com.
Poultry Network, unrivaled insights into commercial poultry production. Kate and Kelly, welcome back to the podcast. You're actually our first repeat. I was going to say offenders. I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but no, delighted that you've joined us again. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
This is a little bit of a repair job, isn't it? I know when we broadcast previously about your introduction of your standards, I personally might not have been word perfect in the description of some of those things, and you were keen to get back in touch, which we absolutely thoroughly welcome. Clarify one or two points, but it's a great opportunity also just to discuss the standards as a whole because they are live, kind of how we got here and where we're going.
And these are the hatchery standards, aren't they? This is the interesting thing for us as a podcast format where we have a meat guy and an egg guy. Is these standards are across all sorts of different proteins. Yeah, not only the egg hatcheries and the meat hatcheries, but also turkey poults and ducklings, etc.
It's the first time we've had to look at the same bit of paper, and we were both supposed to know what we're talking about, so you can test us.
So maybe the best place to start is, it's to start at the start, I suppose. So just give us a little outline as to the standards. What are the key changes that we're seeing in these standards? And what do you think are going to have the biggest impact on the hatcheries going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So as our members might be aware, it has been quite some time since we've reprinted the hatchery standard. So the previous version was 2017. So they were quite overdue from our perspective in terms of updating them. in terms of the areas we've looked at, there's not too much that is sort of a fundamental change or a big change, but we have bolstered our section on killing. So what we've done basically is had a thorough review of the latest guidance, mainly following guidance from the Humane Slaughter Association, to incorporating that where appropriate. We've looked at things such as contingency planning for killing as well, because obviously that's a key area as well. Some other bits and bobs. There's a little bit in there in terms of areas we're looking at going forwards. So those would be some of our information boxes, things like in ovo sexing, for example, artificial intelligence, the use of that. There's a section on wild animal control that's gone across all species. But again, from our perspective, none of these are sort of major changes. They're kind of just general updates that we'd expect to put into kind of all species standards.
Well, I would have thought a lot of the wild animal control stuff is probably already being replicated, isn't it, in other standards already, in terms of rodent control and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Can I jump straight into the kind of consultation word, because I think that's possibly where some of the ripples in the trade have been over the course of the introduction of this revision, and from a laying sector perspective, I expect there's a very faint dotted line from the laying hen standards that were revised a couple of years ago. But could you just sort of talk us through the consultation process you actually went through with the sector as a whole, but perhaps with a special mention for the laying sector, the egg sector?
Yeah, sure. So hatcheries has always been a bit of an anomaly, if I can say that word properly, because it does, as we've said, fall across different sectors. So it is, meat chickens, turkeys, laying hens, and the duck sector. So to date, we haven't had a specific group to discuss sort of these changes. And by that, I mean our standards technical advisory group. So what we've done previously is take any sort of proposals to those individual species groups to discuss. What we did specifically with these standards back in 2023 is also have a sort of focused group of the laying hen hatchery members and representatives from industry like the BIC to specifically sort of go through them. But what we found going forwards is actually we would really like to have a dedicated hatchery stag to actually give it kind of the attention it deserves, and not kind of just incorporate it in our general, meat chicken chat or turkey chat. So what we've actually done more recently, actually a couple of weeks ago, was to convene our first meeting of that group. Now that's kind of going forwards, the approach we're trying to take. But in terms of these actual standards, the discussions very much went through those individual species stags and kind of individual meetings with affected members, so to speak.
So there's no member.
Sorry,
Kelly, go ahead.
Just to add to that as well, once that process had been completed, ahead of a notification letter going out, we wrote to our sort of members to say, hey, this is coming. So that when I say we, the farm and technical engagement team in RSPCA Assured, to offer support, advice, and give the opportunity to ask any questions about the new standards as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. The impression I've had, and I've only had informal conversation around the laying industry only, but relating only to the laying industry. But the feedback I've had is that actually they didn't experience, or there was no consultation. And so, how do we end up with two very different perspectives here on what degree of engagement there was?
I wonder if it's a little bit that time delay. So obviously these discussions were happening sort of 2023 time roughly, and they actually were finalised shortly after that. So from an internal perspective, they were kind of signed off, ready to go. Obviously what we had then was kind of those further discussions generally around our laying hen standards, and actually all the species standards were paused in terms of their release at that time. So and that's not just the hatcheries, that included pigs, meat chickens, others as well. So I do wonder if a little bit that intervening gap hasn't helped, because ultimately, there was a prolonged time period, longer than we would normally have, from kind of having those discussions, signing them off, getting them ready, and then actual publication. So that
sounds like almost 18 months, or even a touch over. But it also does, what you're saying actually does talk to the fact that there appears to be sort of nothing in the standards that cause the industry, as far as I'm aware, any operational problem, because that was something that I was extremely concerned about. That, as far as I'm aware, you can count the laying hen hatchery members on the fingers of one hand. And speaking about free range and organic, and perhaps a touch of barn egg as well, but certainly free range and organic, the industry is predicated on RSPCA Assured labelling on the packs on the retailer shelves. And if that continuity in the supply chain were to be compromised because the foundation, the root of the supply chain is no longer compliant with just 3 months notice, then you could imagine that there would be enormous consequences for everybody upstream. But I think what you're saying is that was never a risk. It might look like it, but it was actually never a risk. Is that right?
Yeah, we're certainly not aware of any sort of major changes that are going to be causing any issues to our members, whether that's laying hen or the other sectors. And there's nothing from memory in there about, so yes, it's a 3-month notification letter. As with all species standards, if there's something that might take longer to implement, is a bigger change, then as always we give much longer notice, and that's kind of worked out through those consultative discussions about what would be an actual appropriate time period. So
am I right in
we've had
thinking
there isn't anything like that?
Yeah, Kate, thank you, I understand. Am I right in thinking if I'm a supermarket and I've got RSPCA Assured marked eggs on the shelf, if I'm to use that logo, then the chicks that turned into the laying hens that produce the eggs do need to come from an RSPCA Assured hatchery at the point that they are hatched, and therefore it's critical that future changes, there's a hand in glove approach with a very, very small number of actors that are producing the chicks that are assured.
Yes.
Have I understood it correctly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we're very cognizant of that, in not just in standards development, but also in compliance and understanding the criticality of that supply chain. So when we're looking at if, for example, one of our hatcheries had some sort of issues from a kind of welfare perspective and from a compliance perspective, our approach would be to work really closely with them, support them to rectify those compliance issues. And if it got to a point where it was significantly critical, we would never sort of leave the sort of end-to-end supply chain sort of hanging and in a critical state. So we're here for the overall sort of hen welfare end-to-end, and we will always work with the supply chain to sort of help support that that compliance sort of in life and as we develop the standards.
It's certainly an interesting standard. I'd say to anyone that's listening to this that that is involved in hatcheries to have a look, even if they're not an RSPCA Assured hatchery, because in it you have your main standards, but then you also have a number of eye boxes which provide points of information and areas that you might be looking at various points in the future. Different types of technology that you're considering, and in a lot of them you're actively seeking to consult and seek input from people in the hatchery. I mean, one thing that I found was quite interesting for my area was that you talk about feed and water provision in hatcheries, and actually how you're potentially looking at that being a mandatory thing at some point in the future to look after the health and welfare of birds in hatcheries, because at the moment that's certainly not something that is standard in all hatcheries across the UK. But how should producers react to these eye boxes? Because I think for some of them, they have the standards and they think, right, well, I can do that, and all the things that I'm being asked to do, I can do. But maybe there's 5 things here that are big red flags, and that potentially within 5 years could impact my business quite significantly.
Yeah, no, I could definitely understand that comment, and I think it's something that we're very aware of. So in terms of that kind of function of information boxes, what we are going to try and do going forward is to make it clear what we're actually meaning in terms of, is this just for information? Is this for an auditing purpose, for example? Is this future direction, or is it aspiration, which is a bit kind of longer term? So we are looking to make that a lot clearer going forwards. But in terms of the rationale for including those kind of aspirational requirements, because they're not standards yet, they don't have to be met. Part of it was based on kind of feedback from members across the board that actually they would quite like to know where we're heading, so they don't have any surprises. They don't sort of go down a certain direction and then we might turn around and say, oh, actually, no, we didn't know anything about this. Hang on, that's not acceptable to us. So part of the reason for putting it in is that, and also it is just signalling an aspiration. So when we're putting these in, we genuinely do want to consult on this. We want to hear from industry. We want to hear kind of their views, what they're thinking of. Because if we can work together in that kind of more collaborative way, then hopefully we can get to a stage with standards in whatever area we're looking at, for example, that are kind of meeting our aspirations, but are also working practically for people. So though they're not something that's going to come in, in the next iteration of the standards, but it's kind of signaling this is where we'd love to end up. Let's start those discussions. Let's find out that information. Let's get this, data or whatever it is, and then actually come together and again go back through that kind of more formal process through STAGs, etc., or standards technical advisory groups. And at that point, when we'd be looking at kind of actually drafting some standards. But this is very much that this is what we're thinking. Let's start that engagement and see where we go.
Do you see those? Sorry, Kelly, please continue.
I was going to say many of our members are sort of pioneering already in our aspirational standards. So by indicating this in the documentation, in the standards themselves, actually it's a really great signal to say, come talk to us about this. We can sort of work with you on trials and help give that evidence base at a commercial level into as a sort of an addition into the sort of standards thinking as well. So we know lots of people are already doing the things that we're looking to bring in the future. It's about how that can be done at scale, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing that those iBoxes exist to give the members a little bit of insight as to where we might be heading. And your point is well made that there are those that are already there. Yeah. I think, what would you say to members who are concerned about the potential risks of, investing in a technology? Because quite a lot of this stuff that's in iBoxes it represents, I would interpret, quite heavy capital investment or effort in R&D, etc. But anyone who's reading the standards and thinking, well, gosh, if the RSPCA actually conclude that what it is that I'm looking to do is somehow going to be non-compliant in the future, or I'll sit on the fence and I'll wait, that could be to the detriment of welfare in the medium term. What would your message to members thinking that way be?
I think it would be, the areas where we've kind of picked out in these aspirational these iBoxes that kind of signal our aspirations are very much, we're already at that starting point where we want to go in that direction. So if it was something that probably we weren't as keen on, we probably would already be saying that, if that makes sense. I'm probably not wording that very well, but so I suppose it's the general message is please come and talk to us, because ultimately if we don't know what people are out there doing, it's very difficult to have that conversation. It might be that, I don't know, someone's implementing some new technology. If they talk to us early on, we might be able to influence and kind of say, oh, actually, if you tweaked it in this way, that would be much, more, that would sort of meet our standards or what we're trying to achieve with our standards much better. Whereas if we don't hear from that at all, people might get, quite far down the road going in a certain direction, and it might be too late at that point, and it might just be sorry, that's not really going to fit with our standards. So I think the earlier we can have these conversations, the better.
And do you think if in the STAG group, again, the standards technical advisory groups that you hold, there's a difference of opinion between your aspiration and the aspiration of industry? Will you take on board what the industry say and do and adopt, or will you did you take a 3-line whip and say, well, it's our standards, if you choose not to comply, then sell your eggs with or chickens or whatever, without the logo? How I of course refer to the laying hen standards of 23 and the feedback, the noise around the launch of that time, to say, well, actually we were on the STAG committee, this is what we said, and though that feedback wasn't adopted, accepted, it's gone out of the window, if you forgive the pun.
I think so. So the role of the STAG is that advisory group. So it is to gather that information, to gather that evidence, to get that feedback. And obviously what we're trying to do with them is get to the point where, So we might be wanting to move, in a certain direction at a certain speed, but we have to move slower, for example, based on their feedback, or go in a slightly different direction. So the purpose of those groups is to kind of understand those kind of practical limitations and the sort of the feasibility side of things. But ultimately, as sort of the standards owner, for want of a better phrase, the RSPCA, they are our standards, so we do have to make that decision as to ultimately what we go with. But certainly the intention is to, through those discussions, is to bring those members with us.
Yeah, and we're an independent standard, and we're here the only standard that is wholly about animal welfare. And from a consumer perspective, we know that from our sort of surveys, YouGov surveys, that 85% of consumers are looking for their products to be assured from a sort of animal welfare perspective and have that reassurance that the animals have had a good life. So this isn't this is an independent way of continually driving and focusing on animal welfare, but we do want to bring people with us and do that in a way which is commercially viable and sustainable for the industry, but challenging us to go further for laying hens and chicken and turkey, etc.
And that's just one thing I was thinking about when I was reading the standards, and I suppose drilling down into the detail, because as you say, as scientific research and understanding moves on and the standards grow and become more demanding, do you think looking forward that it's potentially going to be viable to have one standard that covers all sorts of different species? Because I'm thinking about there's some things in the standards regarding egg age, for example, and the impact on hatchability and quality of chicks or pullets which are coming out, and actually depending on which supply chain you're in, whether you're in laying hens, whether you're in meat chickens, or whether you're in turkeys, you can end up doing quite different things with egg age, and actually the bird itself will react quite differently, whether it's a poult, which are famously very delicate, and you do really need to take care of them, compared to compared to what I would have said as a sort of a Hubbard JA 57 or 87, which actually are relatively more robust. But do you think they will get to a stage where maybe this standard has to be split up into different species?
I mean, potentially. I think it's one that they've been combined since they were first written, and that people have probably seen they are quite short compared to other standards. They're not, as sort of lengthy. I think it's just with this new hatchery stag, we're kind of seeing how that goes. I think there's definitely short-term work we could do to make it clearer in the standards what are sort of general, and then where there are things that just apply, for example, to a particular sector. I would say, based on the discussions that we've had so far, we haven't identified that many areas that aren't necessarily common to at least one poultry sector, but that's not to say going forward that there could be value in separating them out. It's a work in progress with all the standards, and I think based on the feedback we get from our members and sort of discussions at these stags, we can look at that going forwards.
Kate and Kelly, it's been fantastic to have you back on the podcast. Thank you very much indeed for getting in touch, for correcting us where we needed sort of setting straight, and for explaining that today.
Thank you very much.
Very good. That was an interesting chat, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I keep coming back to just how few hatcheries, again in the laying side of the industry, there are to include, and just how critical it is that all parties come together and have an open and lasting constructive dialogue. If every egg that carries the RSPCA Assured logo on the shelf counts on the accreditation of just a handful of firms, a handful of operations, then we can't do anything that jeopardizes the continuity of that supply chain.
And this is a standard that's a very broad church, isn't it? Encompassing laying hens, meat chickens, meat turkeys, and ducks. But actually, in terms of percentages of RSPCA product, in terms of the meat sector, it's a well-established proportion, but it's the minority of production if you look at UK production as a whole. Whereas for the egg sector, it is almost everything, isn't it? So that's why I think that the egg sector has reacted potentially in the way that it is, because it really is a big deal for them potentially if things go wrong.
It really is. In fact, there will be vastly more eggs produced to the standard than are actually marketed to the standard, because simply of old, that's been the way the free-range egg industry has grown. Yes, there are routes to market that don't require RSPCA Assured, and so there will be entire businesses where the RSPCA Assured team never set foot. But in the majority of cases, even if only a relatively small proportion of an egg packing business's trade is heading into an RSPCA Assured labelled box, often their entire supply base is accredited to the same standards, because it just eases friction and improves kind of liquidity in the trading environment. So, the consequences of this assurance scheme and the accreditation of those handful of members at hatchery level, not maintaining those standards, I think could be very, very far-reaching for an awful lot of people. I'm sure, however, and Kelly and Kate have been fantastic in explaining, their intention, their aspiration for improving the communication through the STAG groups. Again, this standards technical advisory groups, specific for hatcheries, as well as each of the other parts of the chain. I'm sure that parties will come together and let's say normal service will resume.
We shall see. It's certainly interesting that they've taken the step of setting up a specific hatchery stag group. I can imagine that they'll have some interesting discussions there, and hopefully that puts them in a better place going forward than they have been in terms of consulting with producers.
We will all keep a close eye on it, and we will welcome the guys back in due course as further developments take place. It sounds like with the eye boxes and the forward-looking indications, then there's still quite a lot of change yet to come about. So we'll, I'm sure, all learn together. I look forward to that.
Great. All right then. We'll see you next week, Tom.
Until next time.